before the era of PC gaming dominance, when having a library of every game on a single computer was a distant dream. Consoles ruled the gaming world. Atari, NES, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, GameCube, PlayStation, Xbox. These were the giants of their time. But in an age where console exclusives were the norm, and not a buzzword big tech threw around to bully you into buying their dying systems, one console would stand above the rest, establishing some of the biggest franchises and design decisions in gaming history.
It's the new Nintendo 64.
Nintendo 64.
Millions of kids already know what they want for Christmas, a new video game system called Nintendo 64.
Originally developed under the name Project Reality, the Nintendo 64 needed to be a worthy successor to Nintendo's last console, the Super Nintendo, released in 1991. This new console was sporting a 64-bit CPU that could handle more complex 3D graphics, and Nintendo wanted to market this to the world, with the first test model adopting the name Ultra 64. The Nintendo 64 would go on to release in 1996 for $200 and outclassed the PlayStation's 32-bit CPU, which released just the year before. Having one of the smallest game libraries in the history of consoles, why was this console so influential? And why did it become a beacon of nostalgia for Gen X and millennials? As you'll soon understand, it's not the size of the library that matters, but how you use it. Nintendo said, let's make less games, but the quality of these games will be top tier. And they were. But the Nintendo 64 had a problem. Developing 3D games for a new console was hard. Most of the titles that would eventually come to the N64 would need to be adapted to 3D from their 2D Super Nintendo titles. In an interview, Shigeru Miyamoto talked about designing Super Mario 64, saying, "We've intentionally returned to a much older feeling and style. In the Mario games up to now, we've carefully crafted every stage and level down to the individual pixel. Take jumping, for example. Implementing jumping in 3D is really difficult. In earlier Mario games, we were able to measure the number of pixels Mario could jump and know exactly what was possible. But this time, we had to design the levels so that as long as your jump was close enough, you'd make it." This fundamental shift to close enough movement would create a forgiving gameplay experience that would give the player more options when approaching a problem. With Mario having a variety of movement techniques, this close enough gameplay design would come to resonate with casuals and speedrunners alike, paving the way for the future of 3D platformers and making Super Mario 64 the best-selling Nintendo 64 game of all time. Designing 3D games also presented another challenge: controllers up until this point relied on D-pad controls for 8 directions of movement. But to play a game with 360 degrees of movement, you'd need 360 degrees of control. Enter the analog stick. The Nintendo 64 controller would be the first to popularize the analog stick. This novel control used a pair of optical encoding discs, similar to the design of ball mice. This allowed for 360 degrees of movement and could measure the strength of the directional input, resulting in Mario's ability to sneak, walk, or run.
By slightly pressing up on the control stick, Mario will begin to tiptoe. By pressing up further, he'll begin to creep. Still further, he'll walk, then jog, then sprint. This will also give you 360-degree control, which you can see is quite fun.
While the analog stick was important for the transition to 3D, Nintendo also included the D-pad for traditional 2D control support. This choice would result in the iconic 3-pronged controller design we know and love today. On top of the controls, N64 controllers also came with a slot in the back, which could support rumble packs, memory cards, and transfer packs. If you had 2 transfer packs, you and Jacob down the street could transfer your Game Boy Pokemon to Pokemon Stadium and fight it out on the big screen. This truly felt like magic at the time.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
Most of the consoles released before the Nintendo 64 only supported 2 controllers. With better hardware, Nintendo took this a step further, adding 4 controller slots natively to the Nintendo 64. While the number of titles was limited, many of the Nintendo 64 titles supported split-screen couch co-op, encouraging you to invite all your buddies over and host Smash, Mario Kart, and GoldenEye tournaments. Slappers only, of course.
What's going on here?
Sir, I'm arrested.
Before online play, couch co-op was the most accessible way for multiplayer games to be enjoyed. This design choice would be the driving force behind the future success of Super Smash Bros., Mario Kart, and Mario Party franchises, and would set a trend for split-screen multiplayer that would last for the next 20 years. I remember before ever owning a Nintendo 64 of my own, I'd always beg my mom to take me to McDonald's to play Super Mario 64 and Kirby 64 on those goofy arcade cabinet monstrosities some McDonald's used to have. The Nintendo 64 would become my first home gaming console, and my favorite hobby as a kid. Playing through Super Mario 64, turning my friends into enemies in Mario Kart, and squeezing all the fun out of Goldeye's multiplayer sandbox. These experiences have a big influence on what I play today, and created memories that I will never forget. As much as I loved these immersive 3D worlds as a kid, I didn't understand the impact the Nintendo 64 would have on gaming, or that some of its games would still be relevant 25 years later. Looking back now, the Nintendo 64 set the standard for 3D graphical fidelity, split-screen, couch co-op, and high-quality console titles that would go on to establish some of the most beloved Nintendo franchises today. The Nintendo 64 is still dripping with nostalgia for many, and a part of me hopes its legacy will never be forgotten. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you liked any part of it, please consider dropping a like and letting me know in the comments what really resonated with you. I'm still figuring out this whole YouTube thing, and your feedback is invaluable to me. If you want to support the future of this channel, consider subscribing as well. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.